Russia launched what was described as an experimental ballistic missile at Ukraine late Thursday night, and it appears to be a slow domino effect. Russian President Vladimir Putin has now said he will include conventional missile strikes provided by Ukraine's allies at a lower threshold to trigger a retaliatory nuclear strike.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by White House reporter Christian Datoc. Christian, there was an amusing scene where President Biden was leaving a summit, and reporters were screaming for him, pleading with him to answer some questions. Now, there has been a sort of awkwardness to the final weeks of Biden's term. How is he sort of handling his relationship with the press as he rides off into the sunset, I suppose?
Well, I guess you could say the best way that he's handling it is just ignoring the press entirely. And like you mentioned, when the president was down in Brazil for the G20, he ignored questions from reporters multiple times. He did not hold either a solo or a joint press conference, which is customary at these big G20 summits in particular. But I think this is endemic of the Biden White House's media strategy as a whole. They've talked a whole lot about, upholding the norms when it comes to interacting with the press that the Trump administration threw out. But former President Trump, or President-elect Trump, however you want to call him, he interacted with the press on a near daily basis. Right. President Biden has only had less than 20 press conferences. He's lagged far behind Trump and former President Obama when it comes to one-on-one interviews or even informal, what we call spray question scenarios. And it's kind of what got them in the problem in the first place. They hid from the press. It appeared that they were trying to cover up his age or his mental infallibility, whatever you want to say. And again, this is going to define the legacy of President Joe Biden, someone who promised to engage with the press but ultimately declined at every possible opportunity to answer questions.
But Biden is still performing a lot of the duties of the presidency. He is still the president, and there has been some questions about some decisions that he's making about Ukraine, U.S. policy toward Ukraine, as he's getting ready to leave office. But the White House is defending his decisions.
They are. They're defending President Biden going back on his line in the sand, saying that Ukraine cannot use U.S.-provided artillery to launch strikes into Russia. He switched that up after the election, and we have now seen Ukraine launch these ATACMS targeting Russian military facilities, and it hasn't come without consequences. Russia launched what was described as an experimental ballistic missile at Ukraine late Thursday night, and it appears to be a slow domino effect. Russian President Vladimir Putin has now said he will include conventional missile strikes provided by Ukraine's allies at a lower threshold to trigger a retaliatory nuclear strike. It's certainly not easing tension in the region, but the White House is saying Russia is the aggressor here. They are escalating, particularly by bringing North Korean troops to the front lines now. They are adding another foreign country into this war, and all of the fighting and all of the death and destruction could be ended if, Vladimir Putin simply called it off.
And the White House was successful in beating back some Senate Democrats that didn't want more armaments for Israel, although even if that vote had gone the other way, it wasn't binding. But that's a late victory for the White House, no?
It's a victory, but it's also sort of an indication that the president is no longer the status quo of the Democratic Party, right? We've heard for over a year now that the president stands with Israel and its right to defend itself from terrorists in the region, even while still trying to broker a ceasefire and a hostage exchange. You now have 18 Democrats voting to block arms sales or transfers to Israel. You had a few others voting present. And of course, you've got Bernie Sanders, who is an independent but caucuses with Democrats, sort of ginning up this new movement among the caucus to say, hey, enough is enough. Biden's not going to get a ceasefire. We need to stop providing Israel with arms. It is sort of a black mark on Biden's legacy, especially when he framed himself as a president who could restore traditional U.S. relationships with our allies overseas. There is still time before he leaves office, and while it was a small win in that they were able to lobby against the resolution and it was voted down, it does sort of indicate that the president is certainly already in the rear view when it comes to Democratic lawmakers.
Another way in which he is going to end up in the rear view is when the Trump administration takes power, certain Biden administration policies will be done away with. And you've written about how this could jeopardize what Biden wanted to do on student loan forgiveness.
Well, the president's efforts to forgive student loan debt obviously fell far short of what he promised on the campaign trail, blanket $10,000 for forgiveness for every single American student loan borrower. That being said, we don't know what President-elect Trump will do when it comes to these initiatives. We do know he has proposed gutting the Department of Education, and while he can't formally shutter it without help from Congress, which means it's probably not going to happen, he can let some of these lawsuits suing the Department of Education over Biden's initiatives proceed and play out. The biggest impact that could have is when it comes to the SAVE program, which is the subject of 7 or 8 lawsuits filed by Republican attorneys general. If that were to be ruled unconstitutional or blocked in any format, the 8 million people who have signed up, they will see their rates go up on their student loan payments. This is a difficult issue because we do know that Donald Trump often sets policy based on how people react to their bottom line or how it will impact their pocketbook. I don't necessarily see him doing anything that would raise costs on millions of Americans. But again, he has said he's going to gut the Department of Education. And if Republicans are already, suing the government over these initiatives, he might just let it play out. But again, it's too early to tell.
Thank you, Christian. You can read Christian and the rest of our politics team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.